The gravel crunched beneath Sarah Chen's boots as she approached the imposing structure of Oakbrook Asylum. The October air bit at her exposed skin, but it wasn't the cold that sent shivers down her spine. It was the way the building seemed to watch her, its broken windows like hollow eyes, following her every move. "Are you getting this?" Sarah asked, glancing over her shoulder at Dion, who held the camera steady despite his visible discomfort. "Yeah, I'm rolling," he replied, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "But I still think we should have waited until morning." Sarah shook her head, dark hair whipping against her cheeks. "We need authentic atmosphere. No one experiences true fear at noon." Their YouTube channel, Forgotten Footsteps, had been losing subscribers lately. They needed something spectacular, something that would make viewers sit on the edge of their seats and share with friends. When Sarah had discovered the stories about Oakbrook Asylum, she knew they had struck gold. "Besides," she continued, "we have permission from the Historical Society. It's completely legal." What she didn't mention was how reluctant the Historical Society had been, or the strange warning the elderly clerk had given her. "The voices in those walls don't like to be disturbed." "Legal doesn't mean safe," Dion muttered, but he followed her anyway, just as he always had since they were kids, exploring abandoned buildings in their hometown. The massive front doors of Oakbrook stood partially open, as if the building itself was inviting them in. Built in 1873, the asylum had once been considered a revolutionary facility for the treatment of mental illness. Over time, however, it had devolved into a place of experimental treatments, overcrowding, and alleged abuse. It had been shuttered abruptly in 1964 after a mysterious fire claimed the lives of 27 patients and 3 staff members. Since then, it had stood vacant, a decaying monument to suffering that the small town of Millfield preferred to forget. Local legend says that on quiet nights, you can still hear the whispers of patients echoing through the halls. Sarah narrated for the camera. "Tonight, we're going to find out if there's any truth to those stories." As they stepped inside, the smell hit them first. Mildew, rot, and something else. Something acrid and clinical that had somehow survived decades of abandonment. "Christ," Dion whispered, panning the camera around the entrance hall. "It smells like death in here." Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling wallpaper and debris scattered across the floor. "Actually, most of that smell is probably just black mold. Be careful not to disturb any dust. We don't want to breathe that stuff in." The beam caught something on the wall, an institutional sign with faded lettering that read, "Quiet heals the troubled mind." "Ironic," Sarah murmured, "considering what we've heard about this place." Their research had uncovered disturbing accounts. Experimental treatments performed without proper oversight. Patients kept in isolation for months, and reports of staff who seemed to take pleasure in their charges' suffering. Most disturbing were the accounts of Dr. Malcolm Whitcroft, the asylum's director from 1952 until the fire in 1964, a man whose unorthodox methods had sparked multiple investigations, though none had led to any action being taken. They moved deeper into the building, each footstep echoing off the high ceilings. Sarah narrated as they went, providing historical context and pointing out features of interest. A rusted gurney, a treatment room with leather restraints, still attached to a metal bed frame. a wall of small cubbies that had once held patients' few personal possessions. It was when they reached the East Wing, which had housed the asylum's most severely ill patients, that Sarah first heard it. A soft sound, like the rustling of paper, or perhaps whispered words. "Did you hear that?" she asked, freezing in place. Dion lowered the camera slightly. "Hear what?" "I thought I heard." She trailed off, listening intently. Never mind. Probably just the wind. But as they continued down the corridor, the sound returned. More distinct this time. Multiple voices, too quiet to make out words, but unmistakably human. "There it is again," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Tell me you heard it." Dion's eyes widened. Yeah, I heard it that time." He swallowed hard. "Could be coming from outside. Sound carries weirdly in empty buildings." "Maybe," Sarah replied, though she didn't believe it. The whispers seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. They reached a large room at the end of the corridor, what appeared to have once been a communal area, with the remnants of tables and chairs scattered about. Sarah's flashlight beam caught a faded mural on one wall, depicting a serene countryside scene that seemed cruelly out of place in this grim setting. This would have been where the patients spent their recreation time, Sarah explained to the camera. Though from the accounts we've read, recreation might be too generous a term. One former nurse described patients being left here for hours, with nothing to do but stare at the walls. As if triggered by her words, the whispers grew louder. This time, there was no mistaking it. They weren't coming from outside. They seemed to emanate from the very walls around them. "Help us. He's coming. Don't let him find you." Sarah and Dion exchanged glances, both registering the shift from excitement to genuine unease. "We should check out the basement," Sarah said after a moment, forcing confidence into her voice. "That's where they kept the worst cases, the ones they didn't want visitors to see." Dion looked like he wanted to object, but nodded stiffly. "Lead the way." Finding the stairs to the basement took longer than expected. The building was a labyrinth of corridors, many of which had collapsed over the years. By the time they located a sturdy stairwell leading down, both were disoriented and increasingly on edge. The whispers had become a constant presence, rising and falling like distant ocean waves. Sometimes they seemed to be right behind them. Other times, they faded to near inaudibility. But they never completely stopped. The basement was colder than the floors above, the air thick and oppressive. Their flashlight beams revealed a central corridor with rooms branching off on either side. Unlike the patient rooms upstairs, these had heavy doors with small barred windows. Isolation rooms for those deemed too dangerous or disruptive. According to records, some patients spent years down here, Sarah narrated, her voice tight. One account mentions a woman named Eliza Blackwood, who was confined to one of these rooms for over a decade after attacking a nurse. By the time she was finally moved upstairs, she had lost the ability to speak. As she said the name Eliza Blackwood, the whispers abruptly ceased, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to press against their eardrums. Then, A single voice spoke, not in a whisper, but in a clear, feminine tone that echoed down the corridor. He took our voices, but he couldn't take our pain. Dion nearly dropped the camera. What the actual fuck was that? Sarah's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly what they had come for. Evidence of something beyond the ordinary. If they captured genuine paranormal activity, their channel would explode overnight. "Hello?" she called out. "Is someone here with us?" No response came, but as they ventured further down the corridor, the temperature plummeted. Sarah could see her breath forming thick clouds now, and the cold seemed to penetrate straight to her bones. They approached one of the isolation rooms, number 13, according to the rusted plaque beside the door. Unlike many of the others, this door stood partially open, revealing a slice of the darkness within. This is supposedly where Eliza Blackwood spent most of her confinement, Sarah said, stepping closer to the door. Local legend claims that after the fire, recovery crews found deep scratch marks on the inside of this door, as if someone had been desperately trying to get out. As she pushed the door wider, its hinges protesting with an ear-splitting shriek, the whispers returned, not from all around them this time, but from within the small room. Dozens of voices, overlapping in a chaotic chorus of pleas and warnings. Don't let him find you. He'll take your voice. Run while you still can. Dion's hand gripped Sarah's shoulder. I think we should go. Now. But Sarah shook off his hand, stepping into the room. Her flashlight revealed a space no more than 8 feet square, with padded walls that had long since rotted away in places, exposing the building materials beneath. In one corner sat a rusted metal bed frame, still bolted to the floor, and on every exposed surface, the concrete floor, the sections of wall where padding had been torn away, even the metal frame of the bed. There were scratched markings, not random scratches, but words, repeated over and over in a cramped, desperate hand. He is still here. He is still here. He is still here. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Are you getting this? She whispered to Dion. He nodded silently, the camera capturing the disturbing scene. As Sarah moved deeper into the room, her flashlight caught something else. A small leather-bound book wedged between the wall and the bed frame. She knelt down, pulling it free. The cover was worn and water-damaged, but when she carefully opened it, the pages inside were largely intact. It looks like a journal, she murmured, flipping through the brittle pages. The handwriting was tight and precise, though it grew more erratic in later entries. Listen to this. Dr. W continues his special treatments. 3 more patients lost their voices today. He says it's a temporary side effect, but I know better. I've seen what he keeps in his office. Sarah, seriously. Dion's voice was strained. We've got plenty of footage. Let's go before... A tremendous crash from somewhere above cut him off. Both froze, staring at the ceiling as dust rained down on them. Probably just something falling, Sarah said, though she didn't sound convinced. This place is falling apart. But the crash was followed by another and another, a rhythmic pounding that sounded distinctly like footsteps. Heavy footsteps, moving with purpose. The whispers in the room reached a fever pitch. Dozens of voices now, speaking in perfect unison. He's coming. Sarah clutched the journal to her chest as they backed out of the room. "We need to find another way out," she said, trying to remember the building's layout. "There should be a service exit at the end of this corridor." They moved as quickly as they dared, the beam of their flashlights bouncing wildly off the walls. The footsteps above continued, seeming to track their movement. When they paused, the footsteps paused. When they ran, the pace quickened. The service exit, when they reached it, was blocked by a cave-in. Tons of debris, making passage impossible. "Shit," Sarah hissed. "We'll have to go back up the way we came." As they turned around, the whispers suddenly stopped again. The silence lasted for 3 heartbeats, and then the voice from before, the clear, feminine voice, spoke directly into Sarah's ear. "You have something he wants." Sarah spun around, but there was no one there. Just the empty corridor stretching behind them. "What does that mean?" she called out, her voice echoing. "What does he want?" Dion grabbed her arm. "Stop talking to it. We need to go, now." The footsteps above had stopped. For a moment, they dared to hope that whatever had been pursuing them had given up. Then came a new sound. The slow, deliberate creaking of the basement door at the far end of the corridor. Their flashlight beams darted to the source of the sound. The heavy door swung open with agonizing slowness, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Then from that darkness emerged a figure. It moved with an odd jerking gait, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. Though it was still too far away to make out clearly, there was something wrong about its proportions. Limbs too long, head too large. "Run," Sarah whispered, and they did, sprinting back the way they had come, past the isolation rooms toward a narrow staircase they had noticed earlier, which they hoped would lead up to the main floor. Behind them, the figure followed. It didn't run, but somehow it kept pace, its jerky movements carrying it forward with unnatural speed. They reached the staircase and scrambled up, taking the steps 2 at a time. The stairs led to a small landing with a door, which Sarah shoved open with her shoulder, nearly falling through to the other side. They found themselves in what appeared to be an administrative area. Offices lined one wall, and filing cabinets were strewn about, their contents spilled across the floor. Through the windows, Sarah could see that they were on the ground floor, at the back of the building. If they could find an exit here, they would be outside in seconds. But as they moved toward where they thought a back door should be, the whispers returned, more urgent now, almost frantic. "Not that way. His office. His office. He's blocking the exit." Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the row of office doors. One stood out, larger than the others, with a tarnished brass plaque still attached. Dr. Malcolm Whitcroft, Director. A sudden intuition seized her. "This way," she said, pulling Dion toward the office. "Are you insane?" he hissed. "We need to get out of here, not go deeper." "Trust me," she insisted, though she couldn't explain why she felt so certain. As they reached the director's office, the building seemed to groan around them, as if in pain. The temperature dropped sharply again, their breath forming thick clouds in the air. Sarah pushed open the door to Whitcroft's office. Unlike most of the building, this room seemed almost preserved. Less decay, less debris. A massive oak desk dominated the space, its surface covered in dust, but otherwise untouched. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a large portrait hung behind the desk. A stern-faced man in a doctor's coat, with cold eyes and a rigid posture. "Dr. Malcolm Whitcroft," Sarah murmured, approaching the portrait. The man who ran this place like his personal kingdom. A metal filing cabinet stood in one corner, its top drawer partially open. Sarah moved toward it, drawn by some force she couldn't explain. "Sarah, I can hear it coming," Dion warned, standing watch at the door. The drawer contained files, patient records by the look of them. Sarah rifled through them quickly, not sure what she was looking for until she found it. A file labeled Blackwood, Eliza. She opened it, scanning the contents rapidly. Most was standard medical jargon, but several pages stood out. Detailed notes on something called vocal cord extraction therapy, described as a means of silencing the internal voices through external silence. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. He was surgically removing their vocal cords as a treatment. The last page of the file was a death certificate, dated November 17, 1964, a week after the fire that had supposedly killed Eliza, along with 26 other patients. "That's not possible," Sarah said. "How could her death certificate be dated after the fire if she died in it?" The whispers surged around them, and the feminine voice spoke again, seeming to come from the very air. "He took our voices, so we couldn't tell what he did to us. But we found other ways to speak." The portrait on the wall began to bleed. Dark, viscous fluid seeping from the eyes, nose, and mouth of Dr. Whitcroft's painted face. Dion made a strangled sound. "Sarah." She turned to see the figure from the basement, standing in the doorway. In the better light of the office, she could finally see it clearly, and wished she couldn't. It wore the tattered remains of a doctor's coat, yellowed with age. But what filled that coat was hardly human anymore. The body was emaciated to the point of being skeletal, the skin stretched tight over bone and mummified. The head was the worst part, bloated and misshapen, with a mouth that stretched impossibly wide across the face, filled with too many teeth. In one withered hand, it held a scalpel that gleamed as if brand new. When it spoke, its voice was a dry rasp, like sandpaper on stone. "You have my property." Sarah clutched the journal and file to her chest. "These were never yours to take," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You had no right to hurt them." The thing that had once been Dr. Whitcroft tilted its grotesque head. "Their pain was necessary for my work, as yours will be." It took a step forward, raising the scalpel. Dion moved in front of Sarah, the camera still somehow clutched in his hand. "Stay back," he shouted. The whispers rose to a crescendo around them, no longer fearful, but angry. Decades of rage finally finding release. The temperature plummeted further, frost forming on the windows in seconds. The entity that had been Whitcroft paused, its head swiveling as if listening to something only it could hear. For the first time, an expression that might have been fear crossed its twisted features. From every corner of the room, from the walls and floor and ceiling, came the whispers, thousands of them now, building into a roar of accusation. "Murderer! Torturer! You'll never silence us again." The entity shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and slashed the air with its scalpel. but the whispers had become a physical force, pushing it back toward the door. The journal, Sarah realized suddenly, and the file, they're proof of what he did, what he was trying to hide. She held them up. Is this what you want destroyed? The evidence of your crimes? The entity lunged forward with inhuman speed, but before it could reach her, invisible hands seemed to grasp it, holding it back. It thrashed and struggled, scalpels slashing wildly at empty air. You have to burn them. The feminine voice, Eliza's voice, urged in Sarah's ear. Burn the evidence. It's what keeps him here, his pride and his work. Destroy it, and he can no longer justify his presence. Sarah looked around desperately for something to start a fire. Her eyes landed on an antique silver lighter on the desk, the kind doctors of that era might have used for cigarettes. She grabbed it, flicking it open. To her amazement, it still worked, producing a small flame. Without hesitation, she touched it to the edge of Whitcroft's file. The paper caught immediately, burning with unnatural intensity. Sarah dropped it to the stone floor, then added the journal, which erupted in flames just as eagerly. The entity's scream became deafening as it redoubled its efforts to reach them, to stop the destruction of its precious records. But the invisible hands held firm. The collective will of all those who had suffered at its hands, now united against it. As the documents burned to ash, a change came over the entity. Its form began to waver, like a television losing signal, fading in and out of visibility. This isn't over, it rasped, its voice growing fainter. I'll find my way back. I always do. No, Sarah said firmly. Your work dies here. Your legacy dies here. With a final inhuman howl, the entity that had been Dr. Malcolm Whitcroft disintegrated, not to dust or ash, but to nothing at all, leaving only the empty, tattered doctor's coat to fall to the floor. The whispers gradually subsided, the oppressive cold lifting. In its place came a sense of lightness, of release, as if some great pressure had finally been relieved. Thank you, Eliza's voice said softly, already fading. We can rest now. And then they were alone, truly alone, in the silent office of a monster who had finally been banished. Dion lowered the camera, his hands shaking. Tell me you got all of that, Sarah said weakly. He nodded, too stunned for words. They made their way out of the building without incident, the asylum now feeling merely empty rather than malevolent. As they stepped outside into the cold night air, Sarah looked back at the imposing structure. We need to tell someone about what happened here, she said. About what he did. Who would believe us? Dion asked. Sarah patted the camera. We have proof. Maybe not of the supernatural aspects, but of the crimes at least. There must be records elsewhere. Families of victims who never knew the truth. They walked back to their car in silence, both lost in thought. It was only when they were inside with the engine running and heat blasting that Dion spoke again. The video, it's gonna change everything. For the channel, for us. Are you ready for that? Sarah stared out at the asylum, its silhouette black against the night sky. I don't think this was ever about the channel, she said quietly. I think we were meant to find this place, to find them. She thought of all those lost voices, finally heard after decades of silence, and felt a profound responsibility settle over her. Their story would be told, their suffering acknowledged. It wasn't justice. Nothing could truly be justice for what had been done to them. But it was something, a recognition, a remembrance. "Let's go home," she said. "We have work to do." As they drove away, neither noticed the small leather-bound journal sitting on the back seat, identical to the one they had burned, but intact. Nor did they hear the faint whisper that rose from its pages. "I'll find my way back. I always do." 3 months later, Sarah sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen. The video from Oakbrook had indeed changed everything. Millions of views, national media attention, and a serious investigation into the asylum's history that had uncovered evidence corroborating much of what they'd found. The whispers had stopped. At least, the ones from Oakbrook had. But lately, Sarah had begun to hear new whispers, coming from the small, leather-bound journal she'd found in her bag, days after their visit, with no memory of having taken it. She hadn't told Dion, hadn't told anyone, but sometimes late at night, she caught herself listening to those whispers, even responding to them. And sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she thought her eyes seemed different, colder, calculating. Just that morning, she'd found herself sketching designs for a new type of therapy, something revolutionary, something that would silence the troublesome voices in people's heads once and for all. And somewhere, deep inside, in a corner of her mind that grew smaller every day, the real Sarah screamed in silence, her voice already gone.